Chapter 3. One misty, moisty morning. The morning again was grey. The clouds, which during the night had sifted so beautifully away from the stars, had closed again, and the dahlias hung heavy scarlet heads in the still air. Mary could see them from the breakfast-room window, deep red against the cypress head. Tib, who had come downstairs with her, was not interested in the dahlias. He had demanded, and received, a saucer of milk, which Mary rather guiltily hoped he would finish before Miss Marchbanks came down to breakfast. Great Aunt Charlotte, who never fussed about anything, always breakfasted in her bedroom. "Hurry, Tib, please," whispered Mary. But Tib was enjoying his breakfast, and was not going to hurry for anyone. His small pink tongue took up the milk in the daintiest, tiniest laps imaginable, all from the very edge of the saucer, and at least a quarter of every lap, Mary noticed with dismay, was going over onto the floor. Miss Marchbanks' voice sounded briskly from the doorway. "Good morning, my dear. Have you had your breakfast?" Mary jumped and turned. Tib took no notice, except to lap a little more milk onto the floor. "Good morning, Miss Marchbanks." "No, not yet." Marchbanks said that lady crisply. "Well, come along, sit down. We'll have it together." Apparently she hadn't noticed Tib and his saucer. She moved briskly towards the head of the table. All her movements as a rule were as brisk and decided as her speech, but Mary noticed, as she followed her to the table, that there was a certain air of carefulness this morning in the way Miss Marchbanks walked which indicated an unusual stiffness of the joints. Indeed, Miss Marchbanks sat down with what could only be called the most extreme caution. Then she poured out tea, and they began breakfast. Great Aunt Charlotte's companion was the very opposite of her friend and employer, both in manner and appearance. She was rather small and thin, but she was alert, decisive, talkative and, it must be admitted, rather managing. She managed the housekeeper, the Bankses, and the tradespeople. She managed Great Aunt Charlotte, who was fat and placid and easy-going. She even managed the vicar of Redmanor, though it could not truthfully be said that she managed the vicar's wife. She did not manage old Zebedee, the gardener, because she never met him. When he saw her coming he faded, like a zebra, or a deer or a stick insect, into the landscape, and Mary suspected that she would find it difficult to manage Tib, the witch's cat. Tib, who had finished his milk now, drew Miss Marchbanks' attention to it by thanking Mary politely, and then jumping onto the window seat where, with the utmost self-possession, he began to wash his face. And Miss Marchbanks, far from looking cross, was eyeing him uneasily, almost, thought Mary, nervously. "That cat," she said sharply, "does not belong to the house. How did it get in?" Tib looked at Mary. Mary decided to respect his confidence. "I had him in my room," she said truthfully. "He must have come into the house in the night." Miss Marchbanks looked at Tib again, and Tib resumed his washing in an odiously detached manner. The expression on his face could only be described as a smirk. Miss Marchbanks looked away, and moved uneasily in her chair. "I'm sure," she said, "that your Great Aunt Charlotte would not like it, dear. You're having a cat in your bedroom. But perhaps," she paused over her scrambled egg and turned her sharp, pale blue gaze on Mary, "perhaps you're a little lonely here, with just a lot of old people." Mary began, politely, to protest. But Miss Marchbanks cut her short. "Of course you are. And it's quite understandable, my dear, quite understandable. This is not a house for children. Not for a child on her own, that is, though for a family of you there would no doubt be plenty to do, places to explore, and so on." She nodded kindly at Mary. "Such a pity the vicar is away on holiday now. It would have been splendid for you to have a playmate, such a beautiful garden too, and goes right down to the river." It seemed a little odd to Mary, remembering the nice, silver-haired old clergyman, who had taken matins last Sunday, that even Miss Marchbanks should consider him a suitable playmate for a 10-year-old. But Miss Marchbanks obviously knew very little about children, and was just as obviously trying to be kind, so Mary said nothing. Then suddenly she remembered what Zebedee had told her about the two cats on the vicarage wall. Perhaps Tib and Gib belonged there, and had come wandering over here to find food. Perhaps Gib was still out in the woods, alone and hungry. She glanced at Tib, to see that he had stopped washing, and was watching her attentively, as if he could follow her thoughts. "Is the vicarage empty then?" she asked. "Oh no," said Miss Marchbanks, "no indeed. Old Mr. Spencer, whom you saw on Sunday, is living there while the vicar and his family are away. The poor vicar can't just go away for a holiday and leave his parish, you know. He has to find someone to take the services for him." "Oh, I see." Mary fastened on the one thing that mattered. "There are children then?" "One, a son, Peter. About your age, I think." "Such a pity," said Miss Marchbanks again, "that they're away. When will they be back?" "That I cannot say, my dear. But perhaps I can find out today. Which brings me to what I had to tell you." She set down her cup and began to roll up her table napkin. "Today your great-aunt and I have promised to go and see an old friend. An old friend," she added, to make this quite clear. "And it is a long-standing engagement, so I am afraid that you will be left quite alone today." "I shall be all right," said Mary. "I'll play with Tib, and help in the garden, and things." The companion patted her hand. "Tomorrow we will think out something for you. We will go somewhere, a picnic, perhaps." Her eye lingered doubtfully on the grey autumn sky, but Mary caught at the suggestion with pleasure. Could I do that today, Miss Marchbanks, please? I could go into the woods, and it would be lovely if I had my lunch with me. And even if there's no sun today, it's very warm. Could I, please?" Miss Marchbanks considered for a moment. "I don't see why not," she said at length. "Though September, but so warm, even stuffy." "Yes, of course you may, dear child. I shall speak to Mrs. McLeod and she will give you some sandwiches, as long as you don't go too far and get lost." "I shan't do that," said Mary, "but I've been wanting to explore the woods." She suddenly remembered the purple fly-by-night, which was standing in a toothglass in her bedroom. Perhaps Miss Marchbanks knew its real name. "I found," she began, but at this moment Great-aunt Charlotte came in, and the sentence stayed in mid-air. "Dear child," said Great-aunt Charlotte comfortably, kissing her. "How are you this morning?" Mary admitted that she was much the same as yesterday. "And did you sleep well?" asked Great-aunt Charlotte, in the calm, flat voice of the very deaf. "Very well, thank you, Aunt Charlotte. I woke up once." "What woke you?" asked Miss Marchbanks sharply. Mary was startled at her tone. "Oh, a noise. A cat fight, I think," she said, and Miss Marchbanks sat back, apparently satisfied. "And an awful thump," added Mary. "A lump," said Great-aunt Charlotte. "In your bed? Oh dear, that will never do. I wonder if another mattress." "Not a lump, Aunt Charlotte, a thump," said Mary loudly. "Yes dear, I know. Such a pity. There's nothing more annoying than a lumpy bed," said Great-aunt Charlotte. At this moment further explanations were prevented by the entry into the breakfast room, wheezing and waddling, of Great-aunt Charlotte's elderly and, we might as well admit it, rather unpleasant dog, Confucius, and, at one and the same moment, Confucius saw Tib, and Tib saw Confucius. "Oh dear," said Great-aunt Charlotte, making an ineffectual grab for Confucius. "Oh dear me," cried Miss Marchbanks, starting to rise briskly from her chair, then, with a wince, rising rather slowly. "Oh," cried Mary, who did not care at all for Confucius, but a good deal for Tib. But nobody need have worried. Tib, the witch's cat, merely gave the Pekingese what will have to be described as a look, and Confucius, who had darted forward, slobbering with pleasure and excitement, stopped short, remembered that he had a pressing engagement somewhere quite different, and went out with what was supposed to be careless dignity, but looked like a hasty shuffle. Tib smirked, tidied away a whisker, and suggested to Mary that she should open the window to let him take his morning stroll across the lawn. So it came about that soon after Great-aunt Charlotte and her companion had driven away to visit the old friend, Mary, with sandwiches in her coat pocket, went out into the garden to look for Tib and Zebedee. Tib was nowhere to be seen, but she found Zebedee straight away. He was wheeling a barrow along between the lawn and the side of the house. "Good morning," said Mary. "Please, have you seen Tib anywhere?" Zebedee shook his head and went on trundling. Mary trotted along beside the barrow. "We were going to look for Gib today, you see," she explained. "Only Tib went out after breakfast." and I can't find him anywhere. Happen he'll turn up, said Zebedee, still trundling. Cats do. Can I help you again then, please? And break me flowers, likely, said Zebedee, but he gave her a not unpleasant look from beneath the brim of the awful hat. No, truly. Isn't there something easy I can do? Zebedee set down the barrow, and took out of it a spade, a fork, and a garden broom made of twigs tied to a stout handle. There be leaves to sweep, he said, and handed her the broom. A bad untidy month this be, September. There. Happen you can't do much harm sweeping, if you don't break my broomstick forby. He gave the little wheeze that passed for a chuckle, and taking the spade, he began to dig the border under the windows of the house. Mary began to sweep up the leaves. It sounded such a simple job, but soon she discovered, as she struggled with the enormous besom, that it was not only difficult, but nearly impossible. She began by trying to sweep round her in great half circles, but the leaves merely curled under the broom twigs, and rustled happily back into their drifts under the trees. Then she seized the broomstick, which was some inches taller than she was, just above the head of twigs, and tried sweeping in short upright strokes, but this was exhausting, and merely seemed to have the effect of scattering the leaves further afield. And when she had at last scraped together a respectable pile of leaves, Tib, suddenly reappearing from somewhere, flung himself into the middle of it, rolled over twice, threw 2 paws of dead leaves into the air, turned round 3 times, and darted off sideways with his tail held up like a question mark. "Oh, Tib!" cried Mary, in exasperation. "And you needn't think I'm coming to play with you now, after that. You can just wait till I've finished this job." So she labored on, and at length managed to get a good pile of leaves into the barrow, which she trundled off the way Tib had gone, towards the compost heap by the wall of the kitchen garden. She could not manage to tip the barrow, but she scooped her load out somehow and then was about to take up the shafts for the return journey, when her eye was caught by something flung carelessly among the sticks and rubbish of a waiting bonfire further along the wall. It was a little broomstick. Mary ran to the bonfire and pulled the little broom off the pile. It was just a perfect size for her, light and wieldy, with a head of good stiff birch twigs. Pleased, she flung it on the barrow, and wheeled her find back to the lawn. "Zebedee, look what I've found," she called, but the old gardener was once again invisible, and so was Tib. At least Mary thought so, until a crackling and swaying high up in a lime tree showed her the small black cat balancing delicately along a high. "Do be careful, Tib," she cried, but soon, seeing how easily and lightly he moved, she went back to her task, and the leaves piled up in obedient drifts under the strokes of the little broomstick. The day, though grey, was sultry, and over the heavy hanging leaves of the trees the sky brooded low, in great sagging spans of cloud. Now and again, rustling in the still air, leaves of lime and oak and copper beech would release their hold, and come floating down to swell the drifts of rust and ochre on the lawn. Somewhere shrilly, the robin began to sing. One more barrow load, thought Mary, then she would call Tib down from the lime tree, and they would go off together into the woods for lunch. Zebedee had already gone for his. There was no sign of him. She paused in her work and stood for a moment, leaning on the broomstick. The day was certainly warm. She pushed the hair back out of her eyes, and as she did so, noticed a gleam of purple in the grass. A single fly-by-night flower was lying there. It must have fallen yesterday as she carried her prize home. She picked it up, but the flower, grown soft, crushed in her hand, and on her fingers the juice from its petals ran purple and red, and gold dusty from the yellow tongue. She dropped the squashed flower into her pocket, and rubbed her sticky hand sharply down the handle of the broom, and turned back to her sweeping. Then it happened. At the touch of the purple juice the little broomstick gave a leap, a violent twist, a kick like the kick of a pony. Instinctively Mary clung to it, but it had twisted between her legs, and she fell. But she never reached the ground, for as she tipped forward, clinging along the handle of the little besom, with the head of twigs between her knees, the broomstick reared, shook itself violently, and then soared up towards the treetops with a swish like the rustle of a little wind. And as it tore past the upper boughs, with Mary clinging for dear life to the handle, there was a scream and a crackle of twigs, and, with paws stretched like a flying squirrel, Tip flung himself out of the lime tree and onto the back of the besom. The broomstick jerked slightly under the impact, and then tore on, up, straight as a spear, towards the sagging clouds.